Hello everybody and welcome to episode 1 of Vic University. I'm your host, Vic. Today we're going to discuss why did George W. Bush do 9/11? It's a question which has been asked by many people for a long time and denied by even more. But today we're uncovering the truth. But first, a word from our sponsor. Are you suffering from hair loss, hair growth in unwanted regions? Well, there might just be a pill which could save you, and it's called estrogen. Estrogen will prevent hair loss. It will stop body hair growth in areas you don't want to, and it is going to prevent aggression. Side effects may include titties. So why did George W. Bush do 9/11? Well, it all starts way back in like the 40s or 30s with a man named Prescott Bush. He's an important politician and a very rich man. Rich people have this thing where they like to be richer, so he invests a bunch of money into oil exploration. So he becomes an oil millionaire. Why not? It's America. And he also becomes a senator, so he's important. He has a child called George H.W. Bush. That's the father of George W. Bush. And this George H.W. is a rich guy, as you would expect. And he does rich guy things. He works with oil wells around the world. Saudi Arabia, in Texas. And he also works as a secret informant for the CIA. And surprisingly enough, on the day when John F. Kennedy is killed, this guy happened to be undercover in Dallas, where Kennedy was killed. So after Kennedy was successfully killed, George H.W. Bush was coincidentally promoted to CIA director. And then he became vice president under Reagan. And you know what happened to Reagan about 60 days into his presidency? Someone tried to murder him. You may wonder why someone would kill Reagan. Well, there's a billion reasons, but this guy actually had zero. So the theory goes that someone told him to kill that, so the vice president, the CIA director and friend of the CIA, could become president. But it didn't work out, so eventually he waits his turn and he becomes elected president because he becomes the Republican nominee. So George H.W. Bush is president now. Now, during all this period, he was still doing business with the Saudis. He's an oil millionaire, the Saudis are oil millionaires, so they do lots of trading all around. And it turns out that the Bush family, not just George H.W. Bush, owed billions in money to the Saudi royal family. And in case you didn't know, the Saudi royal family has like 6,000 members. It's huge. So every rich person in Arabia is basically part of the House of Saud at this point. So after he has all this debt and he's president, he has to do something to repay his Saudi friends. And the Saudi friends have an idea. See, for the past few years, they had this issue with this angry little Ba'athist man called Saddam Hussein, who was the ruler of Iraq. So they want to do something about Iraq, but Iraq has a huge army, over 1 million men. So instead they call upon their friend George H.W. to go and invade Iraq and, remove the #1 threat. The guy who just took control over major parts of the oil fields. That's right, he invaded Kuwait. So now Hussein was controlling large parts of the oil in the Middle East, which George H.W. Bush couldn't let happen, and his Saudi friends double couldn't let happen. So, Gulf War #1. The US-led coalition rushes into Iraq in an attempt to destroy Hussein and his power base. They fail. And then George H.W. is not elected anymore. So after he is not elected anymore, he knows that he's not going to win another election after being voted out after the first term. So what he does instead is get his 2 sons, Jeb Bush and George W. Bush, jobs as governors. Jeb Bush becomes the governor of Florida and George W. Bush becomes the governor of someplace I don't care about. George W. eventually runs for president. And the vote is historically close. It's so close that one state could sway the way the votes would go. And bet which state it was. It was Florida. And in Florida, the count is so close that the state constitution says they have to redo the entire counting to make sure there's no mistakes. But here comes Jeb Bush, son of George H.W., brother of George W. And what does he do? He decides they don't need to count the votes. He decides, it's cool, my brother won. And that's how George W. Bush becomes president of the United States. It's not because he won the election, but because his brother deliberately sabotaged the election process. So after that happens, George W. looks around and is like, well, my family still owes the Saudis a fuckload of money. But we can't start another war, because when George H.W. started the war, there was a huge outcry in the people, and he lost the election, so maybe don't do that again. So he has a report made by a commission, and the commission is called the Commission for the New American Century. And they make a report about how to prepare America for the new century. And their conclusion in the report is that there's no way at all, that the American public would ever support another war unless there was an attack on American soil the size of Pearl Harbor. Coincidentally, not 1.5 years later, boom, 9/11. And what does George W. Bush do? He goes to war with Iraq. And this time they kill Hussein, and the Saudis are happy, and they destroy our civil rights, and that's how it happened. Now, I'm not saying here that George W. Bush did 9/11. That's stupid. I don't think he was smart enough to do that. Here's what I think happened. He has a lot of friends in the Saudi government, and he was maybe wanting to, help them by invading Hussein, as his father had done. But he couldn't just justify a war, so his Saudi friends knew that, and they were like, well, a new Pearl Harbor, eh? So they decide to, ask one of their crazy uncles, which they have, because Saudi royal family is huge. So they got a crazy uncle named Bin Laden, and they gave him a bunch of money so that Bin Laden could attack America, so that the rest of the Saudis would get a reason for America to invade their rival. And that's why 9/11 happened. The Bush family owed money to the Saudis, so the Saudis empowered one of their crazy guys to attack America to give the Bush family a credible reason to attack their main enemy. And that's why 9/11 happened. Anyways, ask your doctor about estrogen.